They said he would choose Evangeline. The whispers had stalked the Ashworth sisters to every drawing room in London like shadows, growing darker with each retelling. For months, the Ton had charted the Earl of Blackmore's every appearance, every glance, every polite inquiry, all leading to the inevitable conclusion. He would propose to the eldest Ashworth daughter. Evangeline was, after all, the season's undisputed jewel. Her golden curls cascaded like spun sunlight. Her eyes were the precise shade of summer sky, and her laugh, a melodic cascade of silver bells, had already launched a dozen lesser proposals. She moved with an innate grace, a living embodiment of the era's ideal of feminine beauty, and her smile, radiant and practiced, was an invitation to adoration. The Ashworth parlor, usually a hub of genteel activity, held an almost reverent hush that autumn afternoon. Lady Ashworth, a woman whose every breath was dedicated to social climbing, fussed with a stray cushion, her eyes darting nervously between her daughters and the imposing figure by the fireplace. Lord Ashworth, portly and perpetually bewildered by the intricacies of the marriage market, merely grunted into his newspaper. Evangeline, poised by a tall window, was arranging a vase of late-blooming roses, her profile a study in serene perfection. She knew her role, and she played it flawlessly. She was the prize, the culmination of her mother's tireless efforts, and the Earl of Blackmore, with his vast estates and even vaster fortune, was the ultimate triumph. Across the room, almost swallowed by the heavy velvet drapes, sat Imogen Ashworth. Her dark hair, a stark contrast to her sister's luminescence, was pulled back severely, accentuating the intelligent, if somewhat serious, cast of her features. Her dress, a practical grey wool, seemed designed to render her invisible, a stark counterpoint to Evangeline's delicate silks. She was hunched over a worn copy of Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations, her brow furrowed in concentration. Imogen was everything her sister was not: unremarkable, quiet, easily overlooked. She preferred the company of books to ballrooms, the logic of ledgers to the flirtations of fops. She existed in the periphery, a silent, studious shadow, content to observe the grand spectacle of society from its quietest corners. The Earl of Blackmore, Edmund, was a man carved from granite. His dark hair, neatly trimmed, framed a face that was more compelling than handsome, marked by sharp angles and a jawline that spoke of unyielding resolve. His eyes, the color of a winter storm, held a depth that few dared to plumb, and fewer still succeeded. He was a man of formidable presence, his tailored coat and severe cravat doing little to soften the aura of power that emanated from him. He had entered the room with the quiet authority of a predator, and now he stood, surveying the scene, his gaze sweeping over the polished mahogany, the antique porcelain, the carefully arranged tableau of the Ashworth family. It lingered, as everyone expected, on Evangeline. A collective, almost imperceptible sigh of anticipation rippled through the room. Lady Ashworth straightened, a triumphant smile already forming on her lips. But then, something shifted. Edmund's gaze, rather than settling on the radiant beauty, continued its slow, deliberate traverse. It bypassed the roses, the window, the shimmering golden curls, and landed, with an almost audible thud, on the figure hunched in the corner. Imogen, sensing the sudden weight of attention, looked up only once. Her plain brown eyes, usually so guarded, met his for a fleeting, startled moment before darting away like a deer caught in a hunter's lamp. A flush crept up her neck, staining her pale cheeks. She clutched her book tighter, as if it were a shield against the sudden, unwelcome spotlight.
Then came the scandal, a web of deceit spun by unscrupulous partners, chief among them Lord Ashworth. The details, was still a blur of pain and fury for Edmund. Ruined investments, false accusations, the public humiliation that had driven his proud father to an early grave. Edmund, barely out of his teens, had inherited an estate teetering on the brink of ruin and a legacy stained with shame. He had spent a decade rebuilding, meticulously, ruthlessly. Every penny earned, every acre restored, was a brick laid in the foundation of his revenge. He had sworn to make the Ashworths pay, to strip them of their pride and position as they had stripped his family of theirs. The most elegant, most public way to do this, he had decided, was to take an Ashworth daughter as his wife, parade her as a trophy, and then, when the time was right, cast her aside, leaving the family's reputation in tatters. Evangeline, with her dazzling beauty and social standing, had seemed the perfect, most cutting instrument for his retribution. Yet, as he had watched Imogen in the parlor, hunched over her book, something had snagged his attention. It wasn't her appearance, which was, by society's standards, unremarkable. It was the book itself and the intensity with which she devoured its contents. "You were reading The Wealth of Nations," he stated, his voice surprisingly devoid of accusation. Imogen blinked, startled by the directness of his observation. "Yes, my lord." "With annotations," he added, a hint of curiosity in his tone. Unusual for a young lady. She felt a flicker of defiance. "Perhaps, my lord, but I find the principles of economic theory and estate management rather compelling." He raised an eyebrow, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "Indeed. More compelling than, say, the latest fashion plates?" "Infinitely," she replied, her voice gaining a surprising firmness. "Fashion changes with the season. The welfare of a nation or an estate endures." His eyes narrowed, not in disapproval, but in a deeper assessment. He had expected vapid pleasantries, a nervous giggle. Instead, he found a quiet intellect. "Tell me, Miss Ashworth, what were your thoughts on the chapter concerning agricultural improvements?" And so began their first true conversation, not in the study, but during a chaperoned walk through the Ashworth Gardens the following day, while Evangeline was engaged in a lively discussion about the upcoming ball with a group of admirers. Edmund had deliberately sought out Imogen. He had found her near the neglected kitchen garden, making notes in a small, leather-bound journal. "You read about crop rotation," he observed, echoing his earlier comment. Imogen looked up, her expression less startled this time, more resigned. "Someone must, my lord. Father's steward retired last spring, and the new one, well, he lacks a certain foresight. The fields are fallow where they should be rotated, and the drainage is abysmal." She trailed off, then added with a flash of passion, "The tenants deserve better. Their livelihoods depend on it." Edmund found himself genuinely intrigued. This was not the simpering debutante he had prepared for. This was a woman who saw problems and, more importantly, considered solutions. "And you think you could do better?" he challenged, a subtle test in his voice. For the first time, she looked directly at him, her brown eyes alight with conviction. "I know I could. I've spent years studying Father's ledgers, observing the land, speaking with the farmers. There are simple, cost-effective methods that would yield significant improvements, both for the crops and for the tenant families." Their subsequent meetings shifted from the gardens to the Ashworth Library, a place Imogen usually had to herself. Edmund, feigning an interest in obscure historical texts, would subtly guide their conversations back to estate management, to finances, to the practicalities of running a large household. Imogen, initially hesitant, soon blossomed under his focused attention. She spoke of the importance of proper accounting, of fair rents, of investing in infrastructure for long-term gains. She revealed how she had, for years, quietly managed the household accounts. ensuring the Ashworths didn't overspend their dwindling resources, how she corresponded with tenants on her father's behalf, often offering advice that went unheeded by him but was appreciated by the farmers. Her quiet compassion for the families who worked the land was evident in every word. Edmund listened, fascinated. He had come to the Ashworths seeking a weapon, a means to an end. He had expected to find a beautiful, empty-headed socialite. Instead, he was discovering a woman of formidable intelligence, sharp wit, and a deep, practical understanding of the very things that had nearly ruined his own family. His internal conflict began to brew. His revenge plan, once so clear and satisfying, now felt crude. Marrying Evangeline would be a public spectacle, a fleeting triumph. But marrying Imogen, that would be something else entirely. She possessed the very qualities he needed to truly restore Blackmore, to make it thrive beyond even its former glory. As he departed the Ashworth residence that evening, the crisp autumn air did little to cool the turmoil in his mind. The path of revenge, once a straight, unwavering line, had suddenly branched. He had come to destroy, but now he wondered if, in Imogen Ashworth, he had found something far more valuable than mere retribution. He was no longer certain which sister would serve his purpose best, or if his purpose itself was, unexpectedly, beginning to change. The door to the study had clicked shut, sealing Imogen and the Earl inside, but it could not contain the seismic shockwave that rippled through the Ashworth household, and soon, through all of London society. The whispers that had once predicted Evangeline's triumph now morphed into a cacophony of bewilderment. The Earl of Blackmore chose Imogen Ashworth? It was unthinkable, a social anomaly that defied all logic. How could the season's most eligible bachelor, a man of such formidable presence and wealth, overlook the radiant Evangeline for her quiet, almost invisible sister? Lady Ashworth was beside herself, her initial shock giving way to a furious, whispered interrogation of Evangeline. "What did you do? What did you say? This is an outrage." Evangeline, for her part, was a portrait of wounded pride. Her perfect composure shattered, she retreated to her rooms, leaving a trail of frustrated tears. The humiliation was immense. To be so publicly rejected, not for another beauty, but for her own plain sister, was a blow she struggled to comprehend. The family pressure on Imogen became a palpable weight, a silent accusation in every glance. Yet within the confines of the Ashworth Library, an unlikely courtship began to unfold. Edmund Blackmore, defying all social conventions, continued to seek out Imogen. Their meetings were not the customary chaperoned walks in Hyde Park or polite exchanges at balls. Instead, they were lengthy discussions amidst towering bookshelves, the air thick with the scent of aged paper and quiet contemplation. While Evangeline held court in the drawing room, entertaining a dwindling stream of callers curious about the scandal, Edmund and Imogen delved into ledgers, debated agricultural techniques, and analyzed market trends. Imogen, initially wary, found herself blossoming under his focused attention. He listened, truly listened, to her observations about crop rotation, tenant welfare, and the delicate balance of an estate's finances. He challenged her, not to dismiss her, but to deepen her arguments, to refine her understanding. She, in turn, found herself daring to challenge him, pointing out flaws in his hypothetical estate management plans or offering alternative solutions. Their shared passion for the practicalities of land and livelihood forged a connection far more profound than any superficial charm could have achieved. One crisp autumn evening, as they walked through the Ashworth's neglected gardens, the air scented with damp earth and fading blooms, Imogen finally voiced the question that had plagued her and society. "Why me, my lord?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, her gaze fixed on a withered rosebush. "Everyone expected you to choose Evangeline. She is everything a man of your standing could desire." Edmund paused beside her, his silhouette stark against the twilight sky. The truth, raw and ugly, of his initial intention for revenge sat heavy on his tongue. He had come to destroy, to reclaim what he believed was stolen. But looking at Imogen, at her earnest face illuminated by the last vestiges of daylight, at the quiet strength in her brown eyes, the words refused to form. He found himself speaking a partial truth, a truth that had grown unexpectedly potent within him. "Because you see what others miss, Miss Ashworth," he said, his voice low, almost a murmur. "Because when you speak of the tenants, your voice doesn't waver. Because you are not what I expected." It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't entirely a lie either. He had come seeking a weapon, and in Imogen he had found something far more complex. A mind that rivaled his own, a compassion that softened his hardened edges, and a quiet competence that commanded his respect. Imogen's breath hitched. She had lived her entire life in the shadow of her dazzling sister. Her worth measured by her invisibility. To hear such words from him was both disarming and deeply moving. She confessed, her voice tinged with a vulnerability she rarely allowed herself. "I have always been overlooked, my lord. My purpose, I thought, was to ensure the smooth running of the household, to manage what others deemed too tedious. I found solace in ledgers and comfort in the quiet efficiency of a well-run estate, for it was there I felt I truly contributed." Edmund listened, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He, too, had known the sting of being overlooked, as having his family's worth dismissed. He saw in her a kindred spirit, someone who found meaning in substance rather than show. Their shared interests, initially a means for him to assess her capabilities, had become a bridge between them. He found himself anticipating their discussions, drawn not just to her intellect, but to the quiet dignity with which she carried herself. The subtle shift in his demeanor, a softening of his rigid posture, a lingering glance, spoke volumes that neither dared to voice. It's fascinating how true connection can blossom in the most unexpected circumstances, often defying societal expectations and even our own initial intentions. What do you think allows characters like Edmund and Imogen to forge such a bond, despite the pressures around them and their own hidden motives? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The proposal, when it came, was as unconventional as their courtship. It wasn't a grand declaration of love, but a practical, almost businesslike proposition delivered in the quiet solitude of the library. "Miss Ashworth," Edmund began, his gaze steady, "I intend to make you my countess. Blackmore requires a mistress of intellect and competence, someone who understands the intricacies of its management and who possesses the strength of character to guide it. I believe you are that woman." Imogen met his gaze, her heart a tumultuous mix of trepidation and a nascent, fragile hope. She knew the whispers that would follow, the scandal that would cling to her name. She also knew that this was an offer of partnership, of respect, a chance to truly contribute, something she had yearned for her entire life. She sensed, too, that his motives were more complex than he let on, a subtle undercurrent of something unresolved in his eyes. But beneath the practical request, she perceived a nascent respect, a glimmer of something that might one day grow into more. "I accept, my lord," she replied, her voice firm, though her hands trembled slightly. And so, the engagement was announced, sending another shockwave through London. Both Edmund and Imogen had accepted the arrangement, each for their own intricate reasons, each hiding a complex tapestry of motives, expectations, and a burgeoning, unspoken connection that neither fully understood. The path ahead was uncertain, paved with secrets and the fragile hope of a future built on something deeper than revenge or societal obligation. The wedding was a small affair, as Imogen had insisted, much to her mother's horror. Lady Ashworth had envisioned a grand spectacle, a triumphant parade for her daughter, even if it was the wrong daughter. Instead, the ceremony was held in the modest chapel on the Ashworth estate, attended only by immediate family and a handful of Edmund's closest, most stoic associates. The society pages, starved of the lavish details they craved, could only report on the surprising brevity and quietude of the event, fueling further speculation about the enigmatic Earl and his unconventional choice. Imogen wore a gown of simple, cream silk, unadorned by the usual lace and pearls, a reflection of her own understated elegance. She felt the weight of her family's disappointment in every stiff smile and averted gaze, but she held her head high, her gaze steady as she exchanged vows with Edmund. He, for his part, was as unreadable as ever, his hand firm on hers, his voice clear and resonant as he spoke his promises. The carriage ride to Blackmore Hall was predictably a silent one. The autumn landscape, once a riot of color, was now muted, mirroring the atmosphere within the carriage. Imogen peered out at the passing trees, their skeletal branches reaching towards a gray sky. A sense of foreboding settling over her. She was now the Countess of Blackmore, mistress of an estate she had only ever heard whispered about, wife to a man whose true intentions remained shrouded in mystery. Upon their arrival, the imposing grandeur of Blackmore Hall loomed against the darkening sky. Its ancient stones seemed to absorb the light, casting long, deep shadows. The staff, lined up in the cavernous entrance hall, bowed in unison, their faces impassive. Imogen felt a tremor of apprehension. This was her new home, her new life, and it felt utterly alien. The master chamber, vast and opulent, was prepared for them. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the heavy tapestries and dark polished furniture. A bottle of champagne sat chilling, untouched. The air was thick with unspoken expectations, a tension that vibrated between them like a taut string. Edmund moved to the fireplace, removing his gloves with deliberate, almost ritualistic precision. Imogen stood by the window, her back to him, her simple wedding gown feeling suddenly heavy, suffocating. "You may rest, Countess," Edmund said, his voice flat, devoid of warmth or emotion. "There are no expectations tonight." He did not turn to face her. Imogen did not answer. She could not. Her mind raced, a whirlwind of fear and a strange, cold certainty. She had suspected, of course. His proposal, so practical, so devoid of sentiment, had always hinted at something beneath the surface. And then, a few weeks prior, while searching for a misplaced ledger in her father's study, she had found them. A small, locked box, carelessly left ajar, containing correspondence between Edmund and a Mr. Hartwell. Letters detailing the scandal, the ruin of his family, and his decade-long pursuit of retribution against the Ashworths. The words had burned themselves into her memory, a chilling testament to his true purpose. She turned slowly, her gaze fixed on his rigid back. "I know why you chose me, Edmund," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, though a tremor ran through her. "I found the letters." Edmund stiffened, his movements halting. The air in the room seemed to crackle, suddenly charged with a dangerous energy. He slowly turned, his storm-colored eyes now narrowed, piercing. His face, usually so controlled, betrayed a flicker of raw shock, then a mask of impenetrable reserve. "What letters?" he asked, his voice low, clipped and tight. Though the question was merely a formality, he knew. "The correspondence between you and Mr. Hartwell," she clarified, her voice gaining strength, fueled by a desperate need for honesty, for clarity, about my father's business dealings, about the scandal that ruined your family, the one that resulted in your father's death. She finally met his gaze, her brown eyes steady, despite the tears that pricked at their corners. "You married me for revenge." The silence that followed was absolute, stretching between them like a chasm, vast and unbridgeable. Edmund stood utterly still, his jaw tightening, a muscle twitching in his cheek. He had expected to reveal this truth on his own terms, perhaps years from now, when the sting of his victory would be most potent. He had not anticipated her discovery, her quiet, devastating accusation. A carefully constructed edifice of his plan, so meticulously built, now lay exposed, crumbling before her perceptive gaze. He had expected many things from this marriage, but not this. Not the way his chest tightened at the hurt in her voice, not the sudden, desperate need to explain, to somehow mitigate the damage. "Yes," he said finally, the single word a harsh rasp in the quiet room. "That was my intention." He offered no embellishment, no apology, just the stark, brutal truth. She nodded once, a small, almost imperceptible movement, as is confirming something she had already known deep in her heart. The pain was sharp, a cold blade twisting in her gut, but beneath it, a strange sense of understanding began to surface. She had always been perceptive, able to read between the lines, to discern the hidden motivations of others. She had seen the raw, unyielding determination in him, the echoes of a deep, unhealed wound. "And now," she asked, her voice barely a whisper, yet filled with a quiet challenge. He stared at her, his expression unreadable. The woman before him, plain and unassuming, possessed a courage he had not anticipated. She had laid bare his deepest secret, his most guarded intention, and now she waited, not for an apology, but for an answer. He exhaled sharply, turning from her, bracing a hand on the cold marble of the fireplace. "Do you understand what this means for me? For my name, my house?" His voice was low, laced with a bitterness that had nothing to do with her. "I have married the daughter of the man who ruined my family." "You have married a woman," Imogen corrected, her voice clear, unwavering. He turned his head slightly, but did not face her. "Your arrogance astonishes me. Your silence astonished me," she retorted, a flicker of her usual spirit breaking through the pain. "You expected me to be a docile, ignorant bride, unaware of the history that binds us." He faced her now, slowly, his eyes blazing with a suppressed fury. "Do not presume to know me." "And yet I stood beside you as you said the vows," she countered, her voice rising slightly. "It was your voice I heard, not hers. It was your hand that held mine. You made a choice, Edmund, and now you must live with its consequences." His chest rose with a breath half swallowed. He did not shout, he did not touch her, but every line of his posture was drawn taut with restraint, a man on the precipice of losing control. "I do not require affection," he said after a long, agonizing pause, his voice now dangerously quiet. "I ask only for honesty." "Then here it is," Imogen replied, her own voice dropping to a matching intensity. "I expect nothing from you. Not love, not kindness, only civility." "You shall have it," he stated, his gaze hard, unyielding. They said no more that night. The unspoken words, the raw truths, hung heavy in the air, a shroud over their forced union. Later, Imogen found herself in a smaller, adjoining chamber, the door between their rooms firmly closed. The grand master bedroom, with its opulent bed, remained empty save for Edmund. Their married life had begun, not with a kiss, but with a confrontation. Not with intimacy, but with a chasm of revealed secrets and deliberate emotional distance. The awkward silence of their journey to Blackmore Hall had now settled into the cold, hard reality of their separate rooms. The agreement of civility had, in the weeks following their wedding night, settled into a peculiar rhythm at Blackmore Hall. Imogen moved through the vast estate like a quiet force, her presence initially as unobtrusive as the shadows that clung to the ancient stone walls. She took her meals in the morning room, corresponded with the few acquaintances she possessed, and maintained a polite, distant demeanor with the household staff. Edmund, for his part, adhered strictly to his word, leaving at dawn for his estate duties and returning late. His interactions with her limited to curt, formal exchanges. The door between their chambers remained closed, a silent testament to their strained, yet rigidly maintained, truce. But Imogen Ashworth, now Countess of Blackmore, was not one to be idle. The estate, she quickly discovered, was a marvel of potential, but also a monument to neglect. Edmund, in his decade-long pursuit of financial recovery, had focused on the larger, more visible aspects of the estate, often overlooking the smaller, yet vital, details that impacted the lives of his tenants. Armed with her meticulous eye and an innate understanding of practicalities, began to delve into the Blackmore ledgers. She spent hours in the estate office, her brow furrowed in concentration, comparing old records with new, identifying discrepancies and inefficiencies. Her first tangible act was to address the woefully inadequate tenant cottages. She noticed leaking roofs, crumbling chimneys, and insufficient sanitation during her quiet walks across the sprawling grounds. Without consulting Edmund, she approached Mr. Davies, the estate steward, a man as old and weathered as the hall itself. "Mr. Davies," she began, her voice soft but firm, "I believe we can allocate a small portion of the quarterly budget to necessary repairs for the cottages. It would be an investment in our workforce, ensuring their health and loyalty." Mr. Davies, accustomed to the Earl's more austere directives, was initially taken aback. But Imogen presented her case with such clear, undeniable logic, backed by figures she had meticulously compiled, that he found himself nodding in agreement. Soon, small teams of workmen were seen patching roofs, repairing fences, and digging proper drainage ditches. Edmund, ever observant, could not help but notice. He saw the improved state of the cottages, the brighter faces of the tenants, the quiet efficiency with which these changes were implemented. Mr. Davies, a man of few words, offered unsolicited praise during their weekly meetings. "The Countess has a remarkable head for figures, my lord," he'd grumble, "and a keen eye for what needs doing. The morale has improved significantly." Edmund would merely nod, a muscle in his jaw tightening, his internal conflict deepening. He had rebuilt Blackmore's finances, but Imogen was beginning to rebuild its heart. He had intended to use an Ashworth daughter to further his revenge. Instead, he found an Ashworth daughter transforming his cold, efficient estate into something that felt, unsettlingly, like a home. Subtle, unspoken kindnesses began to weave their way into the fabric of their lives. Imogen, noticing Edmund's late nights in the library, would instruct a maid to leave a fresh pot of strong tea and a plate of biscuits on his desk. Edmund, observing her quiet fascination with a rare botanical print in one of the hall's less used corridors, would later have it cleaned and reframed, placing it prominently in the morning room. These were not grand gestures, but small, almost imperceptible acts of consideration, born not of affection, but of a growing, mutual respect that chipped away at their carefully constructed walls. One blustery afternoon, a sudden, violent storm swept across the estate, lashing rain against the windows and rattling the ancient timbers of Blackmore Hall. Imogen, concerned for the more vulnerable tenant families, ventured out, wrapped in a thick cloak, to check on them. Edmund, returning from an inspection of the damaged outer fences, spotted her returning, soaked to the bone, her face pale with cold. He found her later in the library, shivering by the dying embers of the fire, a forgotten book clutched in her hand. "You should not have gone out in such weather," he stated, his voice gruff but with an underlying current of concern. He knelt and stirred the fire, adding fresh logs. "Someone had to ensure the children were safe," she replied, her teeth chattering slightly. The roof on the miller's cottage was leaking badly. He looked at her then, truly looked. Her dark hair was plastered to her forehead, her simple dress clinging to her slender frame. She looked utterly exhausted, yet her eyes held a fierce, unwavering compassion. "My father," he began, his voice surprisingly soft. He would have admired that. He always believed a good landlord was responsible for more than just collecting rents. He paused, a shadow passing over his face. He was a good man before the Ashworths. The words hung in the air, a rare glimpse into the raw wound that still festered within him. A moment of vulnerability he immediately regretted. Imogen, instead of flinching, simply nodded, her gaze gentle. "I believe he was, Edmund." Her understanding, her lack of condemnation, was a balm he hadn't known he craved. The almost kiss happened a week later in the estate office. They had been working late, poring over maps and ledgers, trying to devise a strategy to mitigate the damage wrought by the storm. A critical bridge had been washed out, threatening to cut off a remote section of the estate. Imogen, with her keen eye for topography, had sketched out an ingenious, cost-effective rerouting plan. Edmund, initially skeptical, had been forced to concede its brilliance. "This is remarkably clever, Imogen," he admitted, the rare compliment feeling like a physical touch. He leaned over the map, their heads close, his scent, pine and old paper, filling her senses. Her hand, tracing a proposed new road, brushed against his. A jolt, electric and unexpected, passed between them. He looked up, his storm-colored eyes meeting hers, suddenly devoid of their usual reserve. The air thickened, charged with an unspoken tension. His gaze dropped to her lips, lingering there, and for a breathless moment, Imogen thought he would bridge the small distance between them. Her heart hammered, a frantic drum against her ribs. She leaned in almost imperceptibly, her breath catching. Then a log shifted in the fireplace, a sharp crack echoing in the silent room. Edmund stiffened, his eyes snapping back to hers. The moment shattered. He cleared his throat, pulling back abruptly. We should inform Mr. Davies of this plan, first thing in the morning." His voice was rough, his gaze averted. Imogen nodded, her cheeks flushed, her own disappointment a bitter taste. The walls had almost crumbled, but they held. Both retreated, shaken by the intensity of the unspoken desire that had flared between them. Edmund, alone in his study later that night, found himself pacing, his mind a maelstrom. The revenge, once so clear, now felt like a distant, fading echo. He was falling for his wife, the daughter of his enemy, and the realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. The next morning, however, brought a new, more pressing concern. A letter arrived, sealed with the crest of the Duke of Roxburgh. It was a formal challenge to Blackmore's long-held claim over the valuable coal seams on the eastern border of the estate, citing an obscure, centuries-old lineage dispute. The Duke, a man known for his ruthlessness and vast influence, was making a move. This was no mere financial setback. It was a direct assault on the very foundation of Blackmore, threatening to plunge them into a costly and potentially ruinous legal battle. The fragile peace, the burgeoning connection between Edmund and Imogen, was about to be tested by an external force far greater than their own internal struggles. The Duke of Roxburgh's letter landed on Edmund's desk like a viper, its venomous contents threatening to unravel all he had meticulously rebuilt. The claim, audacious and thinly veiled as a historical dispute, was a direct assault on Blackmore's most valuable asset, the coal seams that powered its resurgence. Edmund read it, his face hardening into a mask of grim determination. But beneath it, a cold dread began to seep in. This was not a skirmish. This was war. And the Duke of Roxburgh, played with ruthless cunning. He retreated into himself, the old, hardened Edmund resurfacing. He spent days closeted in the library, poring over ancient land deeds, legal tomes, and dusty maps. His meals untouched, his presence in the hall a distant, brooding shadow. Imogen, sensing the shift, did not intrude. She merely ensured his tea was always hot, his lamp trimmed, and that the silence around him remained undisturbed. But she also began her own quiet investigation. She studied the Duke of Roxburgh's family history, his known associates, his past legal battles. She spoke to the oldest tenants, gathering oral histories and forgotten anecdotes about the land. One evening, after nearly a week of this tense solitude, Imogen found Edmund slumped over a particularly dense legal document, his hand running through his hair in frustration. "It's a dead end," he muttered, not looking up. "The claim is specious, but the Duke has powerful allies. This could drag on for years, bleed us dry in legal fees, even if we ultimately win." Imogen approached the desk, a small stack of papers in her hand. "Perhaps not entirely a dead end, Edmund." She laid them gently before him. "I found this in the old estate records, a series of letters from the late 17th century, between a distant Blackmore ancestor and a local magistrate. They discuss a boundary dispute, not with the Roxburghs, but with a neighboring family whose lands were later absorbed into the Roxburgh estate. It mentions a specific cairn, long since moved, that marks the true boundary of the coal fields." Edmund looked up, his eyes, usually so guarded, alight with a flicker of hope. He snatched the letters, his gaze devouring the faded script. "A cairn. This could be it, Imogen. This could prove the original boundary." His voice was filled with a raw relief that startled them both. "But finding it, it would be buried, overgrown." "Then we shall dig," Imogen replied, her voice firm. "I've cross-referenced the letters with the oldest maps I could find. There's a likely area near the old quarry road where the description of the landscape matches. The crisis, rather than driving them further apart, forged an unexpected alliance. They worked together, side by side, for days. Edmund, with his strategic mind and knowledge of the land, and Imogen, with her meticulous research and unwavering determination. They spent hours sifting through historical documents, then ventured out into the muddy, overgrown terrain, Edmund leading the search, Imogen carefully navigating with maps and compass. The physical exertion, the shared purpose, slowly began to erode the last vestiges of their emotional distance. They spoke, not of their past or their strained marriage, but of geology, of legal precedents, of the best way to clear a path through dense undergrowth. One afternoon, muddy and exhausted, they unearthed a cluster of ancient stones, partially buried beneath a gnarled oak. It was the cairn. A triumphant, almost childlike grin spread across Edmund's face, a sight Imogen had never witnessed. He looked at her, his eyes shining, and for a moment, the chasm between them vanished. It's remarkable how shared challenges can break down barriers and reveal the true character of people. Have you ever experienced a situation where working through a crisis unexpectedly brought you closer to someone? Share your story in the comments below. That evening, back in the estate office, the evidence laid out before them, undeniable proof against the Duke's claim, Edmund turned to Imogen. The victory was theirs, but the triumph felt hollow, overshadowed by the unspoken truths that still lay between them. The fire crackled softly in the grate, casting long, dancing shadows. "We won, Imogen," he said, his voice quiet, almost hoarse. "Because of you. Because of your insight, your diligence." He paused, then continued, his gaze fixed on her, no longer guarded. "I came to you with a heart full of bitterness, a mind set on vengeance. I saw your family as the instrument of my father's ruin, and I intended to use one of his daughters to exact my revenge." He took a deep breath, the confession spilling out, raw and honest. "I chose you." not for love, but because I believed you would be the most effective, the most publicly humiliating choice for your family. I thought I could parade you, then cast you aside, just as my family was cast aside." Imogen listened, her heart aching, but without surprise. She had known this, intellectually. To hear it spoken, however, was a different kind of pain. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. But then, Edmund continued, stepping closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You started to dismantle my carefully constructed world. You saw things I missed. You cared for people I had only seen as numbers. You brought life back to this estate, not just financially, but in spirit. You are everything I never knew I needed, everything I never thought I deserved." He reached out, his hand hovering, then gently cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing away a stray tear. "I chose you for the wrong reasons, Imogen, for reasons born of hate and resentment. But now I find myself married to a woman who has healed wounds I didn't know could be mended. A woman of fierce intelligence, unwavering compassion, and quiet strength." His gaze was intense, vulnerable, stripped bare of all his usual defenses. "Now I find myself wondering if revenge was ever what I truly wanted, or if I was simply afraid to want anything else." He took another step, closing the distance between them. "I would choose you again, Imogen. Not for revenge, not for duty, but for all the right reasons. If you'll have me, if you can forgive a fool who nearly threw away the best thing that ever happened to him." Imogen's breath caught in her throat. The pain of his initial confession was still there, a dull ache, but it was overshadowed by the profound sincerity in his eyes, the raw vulnerability in his voice. She saw not the hardened Earl, but the man beneath, scarred by loss, but capable of immense love. She had seen his transformation, felt the subtle shifts in his demeanor, witnessed his quiet admiration for her work. She had, against all odds, fallen in love with him. "I forgive you, Edmund," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I understand, and I would choose you too." He didn't hesitate this time. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, and his lips met hers in a kiss that was both fierce and tender, a culmination of weeks of unspoken longing, of shared battles and quiet understanding. It was a kiss of forgiveness, of redemption, of a love that had blossomed in the most unlikely of soils. The walls finally had crumbled. Their love didn't bloom overnight like the roses in Gothic novels, but it grew steadily, carefully, nurtured by shared work and quiet understanding. Edmund found himself falling deeper for the woman who challenged his steward's decisions and won, who instituted a school for the tenant children, who transformed his cold, efficient estate into something that felt like home. Imogen discovered that beneath Edmund's calculated exterior was a man who had learned to armor his heart against disappointment. She taught him that vulnerability wasn't weakness, and he showed her that her worth had never depended on standing in anyone's shadow. The Blackmore estate, under their combined stewardship, flourished. The coal mines, secured by Imogen's discovery, thrived. The tenant cottages, repaired and maintained, buzzed with contented life. The fields yielded bountiful harvests, managed with Imogen's innovative techniques. Blackmore Hall itself, once a monument to a solitary man's ambition, now hummed with the warmth of a shared life, a true partnership. When Evangeline Ashworth, still smarting from her public rejection, married a wealthy, if somewhat dim-witted, duke the following season, the ton finally understood. They saw the radiant Countess of Blackmore, walking arm in arm with her devoted Earl, her eyes sparkling with intelligence and genuine happiness. They saw the thriving estate, the contented tenants, the quiet respect that emanated from the couple. Beauty might catch the eye, they conceded, but it was intelligence, compassion, and quiet strength that truly captured the heart. And in the heart of Blackmore, where the ancient stones now echoed with laughter and the scent of blooming flowers mingled with the rich earth. Two people who had been overlooked by the world found in each other exactly what they hadn't known they were searching for. Not just a partner, but a redemption, a love born from the ashes of revenge, and a future built on shared purpose and unwavering affection. The Earl had rejected the beautiful sister and chosen the one most did not expect. And in doing so, he had found his true destiny. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.